Hey folks, Scott with Andrew Hilton Wine & Spirits here, telling you about our upcoming beer tasting for Wednesday, February the 16th at 6 o'clock. Now, I had a couple of ideas of what I wanted to do this week, but sometimes you get to pick your beers and sometimes the beers pick you, and the fact is that this week we had nothing but cool stouts happening to come out all at the same time, and I mean, I'm not going to throw us a square peg into a round hole here. I mean, I'm sometimes just subject to what the market's doing. So everything cool this week is stout. Let's jump right into it. Sylvan Lake has Snake Lake Brewing. They have their Commodore Stout, which has been their kind of core stout since they got going. It's a classic, been around since they opened. Now just a winter seasonal for them, but it is back. This is going to be our opener, just going to talk about stout, give us a baseline. Then we get into the weird stuff. From Born Brewing, we had these guys 2 weeks ago. This is their first love. This is their Hazelnut and Sea Salt Chocolate Stout. Very big, very pretty. I had a pint of this at Born Brewing yesterday. I really liked it, and it kind of put the seed in the back of my mind of maybe I want to do something different. Then we're going to go right into Midnight Agenda. This is Annex's Coffee Stout. Lots of coffee notes, a little touch on the sweeter side for Annex, especially if you had Borrowed Time, which was quite dry. This is a little on the sweeter side. Big coffee hit, big and flavorful. And then we're going to figure, well, we're going to finish something very, very big. This is a collaboration between Stronghold and New Level Brewing. This is their S'mores Stout. So marshmallow, chocolate, graham cracker. I get a lot of clove and cinnamon off this one. Big and sweet at 7.7. You know what? I really thought I was going to hate this. I hate a lot of these pastry stouts. I didn't hate this at all, though. I gotta say, all that and more coming up Wednesday, February the 16th at 6 o'clock. We'll see you then.
Media Boutique.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to beer tasting number 88. Ironically, I probably should have done an 88 brewing tasting, but that would have required thinking ahead and being clever, and I did neither of those things. Instead, we are going to talk about pastry stouts tonight. Now, pastry stouts as a style, let's get a little beer in our glasses. We're going to open with a Commodore Set, which is not a pastry stout, but it's a wonderful stout, and I've missed this beer very much, so I wanted to get into that first. Now, the term pastry stout comes around in about 2017, and it was originally a pejorative. It was a very negative term for this new trend of these adjunct-laden, high-lactose sweet stouts. Actually, the lactose is a relatively new thing. Originally, these sweeter stouts were very, very under-attenuated. So we'll talk about that a little bit when we get to the Annex here. But it was started out as a kind of a put-down of these stouts, because the trend that they were seeing, actually, and one that I think is persistent to this day, was they were getting so big in the U.S. That they were actually pushing off some of the more traditional darker winter styles like barley wines, Belgian quads, even your Russian imperial stouts. They were getting pushed out of the market. People weren't brewing them because they saw the opportunity. It was much easier to make money selling these kind of adjunct-laden, under-attenuated sweet stouts that a lot of beer writers really got their knickers in a twist about and said, oh, well, they're ruining dark beer. And that's, of course, very, very silly and not true at all. I will say that does kind of seem to be the case, though. I've seen almost no Belgian Dark Strongs this year. I don't usually bring in a lot of barley wines because they don't sell. I know Blind Men did their Paraplute this year. I didn't bother with it. But I haven't seen that many around, which is kind of interesting. I do like a variety of beer styles. I like having things like California Commons and mild ales and ESBs around, but there haven't been as many. I don't think we can put that all on these pastry stouts, but it is kind of interesting. Okay, let's start with the Snake Lake Commodore Stout. Now, this was one of their launch beers. It used to be a full-time beer for them. It is now a seasonal. Again, I don't think we can blame pastry stouts for that. Stouts as a category, in case this is your first stout, in which case this is going to be a weird night for you. But in general, the name comes from stout porter, which meant strong porter. It's originally an English style that was almost extinct in the UK for a little while during kind of the dark era of the mid to late 1970s through the early 2000s, when, you know, craft brewing almost died out effectively. It certainly did in Canada. Now, out of that, you have these beers that are kind of dark, roasty. They tend to be about medium alcohol, between 5 and 7%. And from the stout family, it's just exploded. We have pastry stouts, we have milk stouts, we have imperial stouts. You could even call Baltic Porter basically just a lagered stout. Black IPA kind of starts with a stout base. We have beers like the Hoyne Dark Matter, where they won't actually say what it is, but it probably started out as a stout base. It's an absolutely massive category, and that's without going into things like dry Irish stouts like Guinness. So it's kind of neat to start with one that doesn't have any adjuncts added. There's no chocolate, there's no coffee, there's no oatmeal, there's certainly not hazelnuts or marshmallows in it. This is just a nice baseline and a very classic stout to start off. So let's taste this one. I still have some residue from this s'more stout, so mine smells like marshmallows. Oops. Okay, beyond the fact that my glass is dirty and I've kind of ruined this for myself, I do get kind of nice roastiness. I get some coffee. I get some classic, like dark, very, very bitter chocolate, baker's chocolate. And in the mouth, it's soft and it's rich. The alcohol is not perceptible. It's relatively mild. And it just leaves you with this wonderful lingering mouthfeel. This is one of my favorite stouts. I can see why they opened with this as a full-time beer. I understand why they don't do it year-round anymore, but that's a delight. I think it would be one of our best sellers if it came in tall cans. Unfortunately, the six-pack seems to be dead. But, and yeah, the Ice Cutter, which is their vanilla latte stout, which absolutely outsells the Commodore, like 3 or 4 to 1 here. Yeah, I can see why perhaps the Ice Cutter... I don't want to say that, traditional stouts have had their day, because I don't think that's true. This is an absolute delight. And you know that I'm just a giant, giant sucker for IPAs. When I go to a new place, I always have to have all of the IPAs first, and then if I want another drink, I might have like a sampler of the stout. I do really like this, though. This is a style that really, really does well for me. Oh, yeah. The Commodore sells fine. Actually, the only one from Snake Lake that we've ever had a real problem selling, and it's a tragedy because I absolutely loved it, was the Fiesta Siesta, which was their Margarita Goza from the summer. We just clearanced it because we had like 2 or 3 4-packs left. Like the first couple flats sold fine, and then that last flat just stuck around. Snake Lake's beers usually very, very brisk sellers. That one just wasn't. Is it the roasted malt that delivers that? Yes. Let's talk a little bit about malting and some of the malts that don't get a lot of attention. When we talk about malting, we're usually talking about, two-row barley. They might add in some 6-row if they're using wheat or rye or something that's relatively difficult to ferment, because 6-row, the difference between 2-row and 6-row barley, at least in terms of brewing, 2-row has a higher starch content, so it will give you more sugar and will give you more alcohol at the end. Most beers, unless you're doing something very weird, are predominantly 2-row pale malt barley. 6-row has a higher number of alpha and beta amylases naturally, and these are the enzymes that turn those complex starches, yes, in barley, but more to our point, in rye or in wheat or something that's a lot harder to ferment. Harder to mash. They are actually, you're adding more alpha and beta amylases through adding 6-row barley in order to actually convert the larger number of complex starches in the adjunct grains to make something that's a little bit more palatable and make sure you actually get a fully... I used this word earlier, and now it's just gone right out of my head. A proper full attenuation, which is basically a way of saying that you have fermented out enough of the sugars that the beer tastes dry and clean. We're going to talk a little bit about our lesser-known lights here, and those are things like Carapils, Carafoam. These are caramelized malts, which are a little bit different than crystal malt. Crystal malt is there to add kind of that bright orange color to an IPA. But things like Carafoam, Carapils, these are kind of structural malts, and they're there to, Carafoam, you'll be very unsurprised to learn, is very specifically malted to give you better head retention. And things like Carapils and that, they're specifically there to give you more body, more mouthfeel, more richness, to give you that, kind of that thing that makes a stout satisfying, really, and gives it that big mouth-filling sort of character to it. That is your lesser lights and lesser known grains, and they're very, very important in the brewing scene, but they're very rarely mentioned. When brewers talk about it, they talk about what gives the beer flavor. They don't usually talk about some of the lesser grains, that lesser in percentage, not in quality, the lesser important grains in terms of flavor profile, because they're just, we add them because we need to. That's, we don't talk about the base of the statue, we talk about the statue. It's very much that sort of thing. I think malt is just coincidence in the name, because, well, I actually don't know the original name for malt, like chocolate malt, like malted milk. I have no idea what the actual origin of that is. None. Huh. Apparently they had malted barley in them at one point. And I would guess that it was there as a thickener to give it like more kind of that milkshaky sort of feel. Huh. Well, I learned something today too. All right, good. But yeah, rich, thick, kind of. I like this style. I hope it never goes away. Just a wonderfully balanced all-around beer.
Got some like red licorice or something happening.
You're picking up licorice notes?
Like, yeah, not like, no, not black licorice, just like specifically red licorice.
Like red licorice nibs
like
sort of thing?
kind
Yeah.
Of thing. Yeah, totally.
Why are nibs such a different flavor from like red rope licorice? They should be the same thing, but nibs A taste
Totally.
better,
Yeah.
And B, I never have them unless I'm at the movies,
Yeah.
and C, why are they so different? They should just be like smaller pieces of the same thing, but they're completely different.
Totally. Yeah.
Yeah.
Strange. Yeah, I don't know.
I was actually going to talk briefly a little bit about that since you picked it up. Roasted barleys and black malts do not come all of the same thing. If you've ever homebrewed roasted barley, if you actually buy it, it's almost burnt. It's black, and it definitely imparts a smoky characteristic to it. Black malt is kind of one step down. It's a very, very dark brown. It will remind you more like roasted coffee than anything else. It doesn't add that smoky ashiness to the beer so much, but it does give you that dark color, and that's where a lot of your kind of strong coffee aromas and flavors will come from. Chocolate malt is a shade lighter. It unsurprisingly gives you chocolate notes. But when we're talking about those red berry characteristics, it certainly can come from just traditionally roasted black malt. Just in the sense that a lot of coffees can give you kind of red berry notes, but very often we're talking about very special debittered malts, and I don't know the debittering process, but it's a very specific process for things like Black Patent, Special B. These are types of malts where they've actually roasted them to introduce more fruity notes rather than kind of the chocolate and the coffee and everything else, and they also don't have a lot of perceptible bitterness to them. Belgian Special B is the best known, but Black Patent is the English equivalent of the same, and they do have slightly different characteristics. And if you're picking up kind of red berry, red licorice notes on this, I would guess that there is at least some debittered malt in here, probably Black Patent. Because I do tend to find that Special B comes off more like jujubes or like flat cola. Actually, very much like those like cola bottle penny candies, which are probably now a dime because I'm old. Now, moving on. Midnight Agenda Coffee Stout. And I did actually note that at the bottom, it does say contains lactose. And when I said originally that one of the big complaints with these pastry stouts is that they were under attenuated, and I did hint that that's not really the case anymore, once I remembered the word attenuated.
There you go.
That's changed in the sense that originally these beers would actually only be partially fermented. They would leave the original sugars in the beer and just kill off the yeast, strain the beer off the yeast, make sure that somehow the beer wouldn't continue fermenting in the can, but it would actually be the original barley sugars providing the sweetness. What they do now, if they want to add some sugar back, is they do literally that. The lactose will not ferment because the yeast doesn't like converting lactose versus sucrose, or pardon me, sucrose or glucose, into alcohol. So they'll actually ferment the beer fully dry, fully attenuated, and then add sugar back. God, they're $4.99 now.
I wish it was in a tall can so you wouldn't keep forgetting about it. I know, I really like this beer. Okay, moving on. I mean, you all know I'm a hopeless Annex fanboy. This has got tons of coffee characteristics. It is a coffee stout. It does have lactose, which is kind of what lumps it in a little bit with our pastry stouts here. And Craig is going to have a bad morning tomorrow morning. Oh, so, yeah, if you're making a beer where you're not going to attenuate it fully, if you're going to make a partially attenuated sweet beer, stopping the yeast is very, very difficult. You can chill it right down to almost freezing, but that only makes the beer, or pardon me, only makes the yeast just go neutral. They don't actually die. And the second that the beer warms back up, they'll get right back to converting that sugar into alcohol. You can pasteurize it, you can boil it. That's certainly the case. But again, do you really want to be boiling your finished beer? Like, it's boiled as part of the brewing process, but, you know, traditionally before fermentation. So that's certainly a possibility. There are certainly some beers that are pasteurized. Usually, if you're going to do that, you're going to have to sulfur shock it. This is a very common process in the winemaking process as well. Yeast, like all funguses, is very, very susceptible to sulfur. It doesn't like it. It's kind of like putting salt on a slug. It can't handle it. It dies. Sulfur is bad for yeast, and so they'll sulfur shock it. Of course, that runs the risk that you're going to add sulfury flavors to your beer. So under-attenuated beer also runs the risk of infection, because when it's fermenting and it's not fermenting all the way, well, then you're not getting as vigorous a fermentation. Other things can start growing in there. Yeah, under-attenuated beer is kind of a bad idea. It's honestly better, and I'm kind of glad that they've switched to the process of finishing fermenting the beer and just adding sugar back. Sorry if I kind of glossed that over. Sounds a little spotty for some. Okay. Yeah. Somebody said like a Mexican coffee cocktail. I could see that. There is actually a little bit of hot peppers out of this. There's like a fruity habanero thing here that I'm not sure where that's coming from. It's certainly not mentioned in here. But yeah, that's kind of neat. I wasn't expecting that. We'll touch on coffee stouts very briefly here. Coffee stouts have been around basically as long as I've been doing the beer industry. I didn't look them up specifically, so I don't have an exact date for them, but I can remember coffee stouts being like a thing even in the late 1990s. They're not unusual. I think maybe the first coffee stout we ever had here was maybe Pêche Mortelle by Dudiciel. And that's definitely coming from the 90s to early 2000s, because we've had Pêche Mortelle on the shelves since 2005 or so, I'd say. No, Annex does not really have I think they've gotten, well, we talked about this when we had Rupert on, but they've definitely moved away from their kind of once a season seasonal offering, having a spring and fall seasonal and then occasional offerings. I think they're literally trying to do a new beer every week. And as we talked about with Rupert a few weeks ago when we did the Annex tasting, they, like me, have kind of realized that there was a world outside of IPA and sour. And they're trying to do more lagers, trying to do more interesting things, play around with the styles a little bit, do some more darker stuff. It's kind of nice to see, and I hope that when we get to summer and it's a little warmer, they stick to that, and we'll see maybe a reissue of Staircase Wit, which I really enjoyed, rather than just going all in on sours, because I love sours, I really do, but I'm also, maybe just because of the cold weather, really over them right now. That said, Establishment's new one, In the Sky with Diamonds, absolutely ruled. We are now unfortunately out of it and can't get more, but that was a spectacular sour. Did it say they added tamarind? Or are they saying it has notes of... I think they're saying it has notes of tamarind. I don't think they added tamarind. I could be wrong, but I don't think so. I think it's just a standard coffee stout. Although now that I read it, maybe they did, but
Okay, someone who isn't me needs to look at Annex's website and see if they actually did add the fruit, because I don't think they did, but I am always willing to be proven wrong. And I also love tamarind. I don't like working with tamarind paste in the kitchen because it always has the bits of tamarind in it, and I always like add hot water and then have to sieve it out. But it is a lovely flavor. Reminds me, I really love that separate together, the tamarind sour that Annex and Establishment did as a Neighbor Day thing that I still actually have a little bit of. And that's gone into a place where it's very tea-like and very floral right now. That's a really interesting beer if you haven't had it. Ah, so the coffee has notes of tamarind. So yeah, right off Phil and Sebastian. Perfect. Must be excellent coffee if you're getting that much characteristic of the coffee through like the vessel of a stout. That's quite impressive. I had that on tap at Annex the week it came out, and I liked it, but it wasn't out of a decent glass. I don't actually like drinking a beer to assess it out of a pint glass. If I'm drinking it out of a pint glass, I'm just drinking a beer. To actually assess it, they're kind of useless. This is actually a much better beer than I thought before. That's pretty spot on. I mean, you're going to be unsurprised to learn that the Annex is always going to be in my running for beer of the night, but that's pretty spot on. That's really impressive how much character that shows. Ooh. Well, I'll be stopping at Phil and Sebastian apparently the next time in Calgary, which will be next week, actually. Okay. Born Brewing. Of course, we just had them on not too long ago. This is their first love. So it is a hazelnut and sea salt stout. This is kind of their Valentine's Day offering. And this is the first true pastry stout we're tasting here. Now, a little bit of history on pastry stout. It's really hard to, nail down a date that, oh, well, there's somebody in the 1990s did like a sweet stout. I'm going to call like the real start of kind of the pastry stout revolution to be the start of the Blackwater series for Southern Tier, who are based out of upstate New York. They have had, and I've had the opportunity to taste, although they don't sell them here, their creme brulee stout, their chocolate mint stout. They have a mocha, which is a chocolate stout. They have a Terry's chocolate orange style beer. They have all kinds of like sweet, cakey, dessert themed beers, some of which run fully into this is way too sweet, I wouldn't want a whole bottle of it. And most of which are just thoroughly delightful, if very sweet, very sticky beers. While a lot of breweries probably did like one-offs before that, I think the style really did get going kind of 2002, 2004, and that was the date Southern Tier was founded and the date that they first released a beer like that. That's kind of where this style got going, and certainly they were the ones that made it popular. Southern Tier, I've never seen them in Canada, but they're absolutely massive. You can find like almost the whole range at a decent like beer store in Montana, especially their dessert stouts I see all the time everywhere. And yeah, their creme brulee stout, really, really, really neat beer. I don't know if I'd want to have it all the time, but it's probably kind of the beer that all of these kind of pastry stouts owe their history to, because they were the first ones to sell something like that and to make it a big deal and make it like a major style for them. So let's dip into this hazelnut chocolate sea salt. Well, certainly the hazelnut, and it's a very fruity hazelnut, which is kind of neat. It reminds me, oddly enough, it reminds me of like the pink filling or red filling that you get in like pot of gold, like not fancy box chocolates, not like Bernard Callebaut, but like pharmacy box chocolates, pot of gold or whatever your Whitman sampler, that sort of thing. It reminds me of the red ones. It's that like nice but not super nice red berry character. And if they're going for that box of chocolates characteristic, I think they really nailed that one, which is a shame because that's actually my least favorite chocolate in the box. really? Phil and Sebastian actually entered Red Engine. That's good to know. I'm learning more than you are tonight, which is great. This is actually really fun for me. We have very different opinions between Tyler and Craig, so no, it's different. I'll grant it that. I think it has to follow the Annex because it is sweeter and it's also quite a bit higher in alcohol. But I don't think it's as strong an offering as the Annex. There is something in the nose that strikes me as a touch artificial. I'm not 100% sold on this, which is odd because like when we did the Born tasting, everyone was pretty much a winner. This one I'm not 100% sold. Yeah, the Loney's Cherry Blossom, very much. Yeah, it's like candy, but not a candy I particularly like. That's a shame. You know what? I was really hyped for this one. And I don't really get the hazelnut. It's drowned out by like the berry characteristics in an odd way. And I don't pick up the salt at all. Sounds like some of you are, but apparently I really nailed that flavor profile for some things. It's like y'all. Eric, I think that's my favorite comment in weeks. All right, so speaking of Eric, I'm not going to be here next week, but there is still going to be a beer tasting. And I'm going to call on everyone who isn't Eric or Craig to keep the comment section going because our two most prolific commentators are actually going to be hosting our beer tasting next week. So Craig and Eric have chosen 4 beers. I actually had virtually no input in this at all. This is all them. They just were in here about an hour and a half ago, shooting the promo for the upcoming beer tasting, which you'll see in a few days. And they will be hosting kind of some fun maltier offerings. We've got a brown ale, we've got dark matter, which doesn't really have a style. We've got the Blackstone Porter, and then I have been unforgivably lax in not doing the Appleton, which is more or less an ESB, although they don't call it one. This is kind of the house beer of the store. I live in fear of the day that I actually try and put this on the growler station because the keg will be gone in 24 hours and I won't have actually sold any. This is an absolutely spectacular beer. If you're buying the tasting, A, you should be buying it because Craig and Eric are going to be on camera together for an hour and it's going to be hilarious. But B, the Hoyne itself is worth the price of admission. That's just a spectacular beer. And the others are going to be, well, I guess you'll all find out together. That is coming up Wednesday next week, and I know I'll be tuning in at a minimum. For the wine tasting this Friday night, Valentine's Day, of course, now is in the past, but why am I putting them in front of the wine tasting? Genius. We do have a wine tasting this Friday night. It is our Valentine's wine tasting. A little bit late, but, you know, we didn't skip it. We didn't forget. And it was going to be a rosé tasting, and then it kind of grew into being more just Valentine's themed. So yes, we have a wonderful rosé, Devin's favorite rosé actually, the Rosapetsovitz from Franz Weniger, which is kind of a rosé, kind of a really technical orange wine. It keeps the joy of a classic rosé, but then it adds all the technical like finagling and that it's a wonderful wine. I struggle to explain it. It's a delight. Much simpler. We have the Rosier Cuvée Malmaison, which is a Crémant de Limoux rosé, predominantly Pinot Noir. Very, very light, fresh, exactly what you're expecting, like a rosé sparkler. But I like telling the history of Limoux. This is a wonderful wine. It's not very expensive. And I like talking about sparkling wines that are a little bit unusual. Limoux has a long history, but they're not very well known. So I'm going to enjoy talking about this. Because I'm just a little bit of a shameless shill, I'm going to do the Brock Cellars Love Red for our Valentine's Day because it has little hearts on it. And it's also a lot of fun. We'll revisit the topic of kind of the rebirth of Californian winemaking through the natural wine movement. Talk a little bit about Chris Brockway and the folks at Brock. I was there a few years ago. They make fantastic wines. Prices are unfortunately going to go up on the Love line. But we're still getting in at the old price, so we're going to talk about that. And then finally, One of the weirder things that we've done, and we've had Sotal and all kinds of weird Mexican spirits on the channel, we're going to do a chocolate cloudy sake that everyone who has tasted it has expected to hate, including me, and then come away from it saying, it tastes exactly like chocolate milk. This is incredible. This is going to be something that none of you are going to see coming. I think this is going to be a wonderful, wonderful thing, and that's kind of our little Valentine's chocolates. All right. Back to it. And yes, I realize I'm a little bit ahead of schedule. I just looked at my watch and was horrified that it's 6:29 and I've gotten through 3 beers already.
Well, they did mention in the promo that they're bringing a clock for next week.
They are bringing a clock, yes. And yes, next week is going to be absolutely hilarious. I can't wait to watch it. It's going to be fantastic. All right, so let's get into the next. So this is actually a collab, and want to talk a little bit about popularity. I just placed a reorder for this. I don't have any on the shelves. I'm picking some more up tomorrow at Stronghold in Fort McLeod. It's their last 2 flats of this, and they only launched it like 2 weeks ago. So this is a collab between Stronghold and New Level, who call themselves the most metal brewery in Calgary. Not sure how that works, but sure, the most metal brewery in Calgary. This is their
metal, you know. So
yeah.
All you have to do is add a little metal. And
Yeah.
you know.
The
most metal.
So anyway, this is a collab. This is their Gimme Some More Stout, and okay, I absolutely love it because it tastes exactly like a s'more. I do get the Grand Crapper. Crapper. That one's going on the blooper reel. Oh, I'm not letting that one down. I do taste the marshmallow. I do taste the graham cracker, and I definitely get the chocolate. And I think there's a absolute guarantee that you will make the best of 2022. There is no doubt in my mind. Moving on. So, the Gimme Some More. S'more stouts have been around for quite a while. Southern Tier did one in 2008, so this isn't a new idea. And I think this is the most stereotypical pastry stout, possibly in a store, in the sense that it's quite sweet. It has lots of lactose. It's definitely laden with adjuncts to the point where I actually believe they added marshmallows to the brew. Very, very different. Graham Crapper is one of the guys arrested in Coots. Eric's on fire tonight. Now, when you get it in your mouth, I get cinnamon first, which is kind of what I pick up as kind of the graham cracker. The marshmallow is definitely there. It's kind of this nice syrupy sweetness right through. If this is too sweet for you, that's perfectly okay, but that is true to the style. And the chocolate, kind of interestingly, whereas we got a lot of it in the Commodore Stout here, that was very much a dark chocolate, that baker's chocolate. This is more like Nestle Quick chocolate syrup more than anything else. Bananas from Michelle. Interesting. Cinnamon, French toast. You get the marshmallow. Yeah, cinnamon French toast more than anything else, now that you put that in my head. Yeah, because I actually do add cinnamon to my French toast when I make it. It's not the first collab beer, Justin, because they have a couple of... it might be the first they've done with another brewery, but of course they have their Penny Coffee House Ale, which is their collab with Penny Coffee House, you'll be shocked to learn, which is a coffee ale which is draft only. And I know the Owl has had it on tap a couple of times, but I think the only place you're guaranteed to see it is at Stronghold itself, which is really only 20 minutes out of town, so it's not like it's a huge burden to go out there. And Tyler, yeah, I really thought this was going to be a divisive one, and it still might be. Not Cinnamon Toast, Cinnamon Toast Crunch. I'll be honest, I don't think I've had Cinnamon Toast Crunch since I was 11, so that's been 28 long, hard years. Do you like it, Aaron? You're looking very thoughtful.
Yeah. I put raisins in my French toast.
Okay.
You know? I also add cinnamon, brown sugar, all of those things. It kind of gives me a bit of that, like, when a raisin burns to the pan?
Yes.
Yeah.
That crunchy,
That
burnt
crunchy,
fruit.
burnt through. Like, yeah, it caramelizes. It's a nice flavor, and I think this has, the spirit of that in it. I don't think it's, like, dominant, but, like, if you reach for it. But also, Cinnamon Toast Crunch cereal for sure.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah. Like, if that weird sugary powder isn't coating the inside of my mouth, you know what I mean? Like,
Yep.
Yeah.
That's perfectly reasonable.
Definitely in there.
Yeah. Sugar pie. Tons of cinnamon, niche exotic answer.
Ton of cinnamon.
Oh man. Oh, we have some real competition for comment of the night. I mean, two of them are Eric's, but that one really comes in strong. Well, that just took my thought. Craig asked, where does the style come from? So I'm going to nail this on Southern Tier. So Southern Tier Brewing got started in upstate New York. They actually kind of did a stock exchange. Like, they bought part of Victory Brewing, and Victory Brewing bought part of them about 2015-ish, I want to say. But Southern Tier is absolutely massive. They're coast to coast in the U.S., and they make IPAs, they make all sorts of things, but their big, like, claim to fame, when I think Southern Tier, I think of their sweet dessert stouts, and they've been doing them pretty much longer than anyone else I can think of as, like, a mainstay of their brewery. Their creme brulee stout is the thing. Like, you say Southern Tier, I think creme brulee stout because it's that dominant for me. And it's very much dominant. Like, if you look up Southern Tier online and just do, like, a Google image search for Southern Tier Brewery or Southern Tier beers, most of the images I expect you'll see are going to be of their creme brulee stout because it's what they're best known for. I'm certain that some other very obscure brewery in Flagstaff, Arizona or something, invented the style. But in terms of popularizing, in terms of making it part of the beer lexicon, I think we have to give that to Southern Tier. Their first creme brulee stout came out about 2004-ish, and that, I would say, is kind of the genesis of the style. It's a good tasting, but maybe it should be the last pastry stout tasting. Well, fair enough. Look at how much fun we're having. I was going to make that joke too, Eric. I really was. I'm glad we both thought of it at the same time, because I was tip of my tongue. I was going to make that joke, and I just didn't because I wasn't sure how it would come off. But I'm glad someone made it. I'm not sure what to think of this one. This is... I mean, it's not going to be first. I'm going to give that to the Annex. That has to be 1. And this is going to be 4. Sorry, Born. Like, they were awesome, but I don't like that. It really, really tastes artificial to me, and it just... No. That is a little bit... That's flying too close to the all the things sun for me. And these two are so different. I mean, this is fully embraced the pastry stout style. They've gone all in on the adjuncts, all in the big flavors, and it's delicious, but I'm kind of glad I'm sharing the can with Aaron. Like, I don't know if I want the whole thing. Whereas the Commodore Stout, it's classic. And I think I just made my point. You know what? It's really cool. I'm glad I'm having it. I think it's cool. But I think I'm actually going to give it to the Commodore. So 1, 2, 3, although this was close, and then 4 for the Born. So I think this is 1 by a mile for me. 2, 3, very, very close. Big gap, and then the Born. 2 causes pain, but is the best. Then 1, and then a gap 4, 3. Okay. We are very similar, Craig. And it's not a disaster, and it's very, very... I don't want this to turn into a tasting that's a referendum on pastry stout, because I do like them. It's the same way I kind of have a guilty pleasure for, like, giant oaky Californian Chardonnays. I know they're basically the equivalent of a vanilla milkshake, but but I really like Californian Chardonnay. I think it's great. It's a guilty pleasure, and I'll order them in restaurants, and, you know, I'll have other wine people casting me the side eye as I sit there very happily with my Kendall Jackson Chardonnay. But I love them. This is very much that guilty pleasure sort of thing. I do absolutely love a good stout float, which is the very complex process of pouring yourself a pint of stout and then putting a scoop of vanilla ice cream in it. This would do fantastic with that. Elizabeth refused to rank the last two. Fair enough. So we have 2, 1, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, and Elizabeth. And I will go back to the Commodore here in a minute. Gord both have 2, 4, 1, 3. Not a good night for the Born, and I think they kind of earned it. Yeah, that's just not my style of beer. We could have a float week Milkman showcase. Ooh. Oh, I like this idea. Oh, I like this idea a lot. My pant size will not like a beer float week, but okay, that gives me a really good idea. So much to Tyler's chagrin, we might eventually have another pastry stout showcase, but it might be in association with Milkman ice cream, because that sounds like a lot of fun.
That's a good idea.
I mean, we might even do something like, if he has the right flavors, like if he makes a mango ice cream, what about a IPA beer float with like a mango or a pineapple ice cream in it? That could work really well. This would also be the tasting that actually kills Craig with his lactose intolerance, but you know, he's done his guest host spot. He's fine. Since we have time, can we go through the first two again? Yes, we can, because I am actually going right back to the Commodore. Man, my glass just smells like the... Aaron, could I bother you for a new glass? One of the ones that's hanging up there, the nice beer glasses from New Belgium. Yeah. Thank you. We're just going to put that over there. Because if you try pouring it back in the same glass, you can't taste any of it. By the way, I'd like to point out with these glasses, this is for a beer tasting that never actually came together. I actually got 2 cases of these because I had the genius idea of, hey, let's do a New Belgium tasting. And New Belgium was on board. And they gave us all these glasses. They gave us 24 glasses because everyone was going to get a surprise New Belgium glass with their tasting pack. And it was going to be so cool. And then New Belgium immediately got represented by Labatt, like the next week. And they cut the entire line down to just like Fat Tire. And now that's it for basically the whole province, so we can't even have a tasting because they only have 1 beer in the market. So this is the leftovers of my very ambitious, well, shouldn't have been ambitious, should have been dead easy, New Belgium beer promotion. Oh, and you've never had a beer float. Oh, Craig. Well, no, you probably shouldn't, but they are wonderful. And one does taste very strange. Yeah, it's got a real ashiness. It's got, to me, like pencil eraser coming off it a little tiny bit. Not feeling the s'mores, are you, Aaron?
Or
And again, I'm not saying that, you know, Anheuser-Busch necessarily owns New Belgium. They might do, but I don't know that for sure. They might have just signed an agreement that they're going to market New Belgium. I can see that the number, the Annex is also Aaron's favorite. Mostly by the way his eyes rolled back into his head when he tasted it, because it is pretty damn good.
It's so good. It's the best.
And yes, if they did get a big, you know, corporate buyout, I'm sure they are filthy rich now. Same thing happened to Lagunitas when they got bought out. 49% of Lagunitas was bought by Heineken for an absolutely disgusting number of millions of dollars, which is why Lagunitas here now is rep by Molson's, because Molson's has the Heineken contract and Heineken owns Lagunitas, which is why Lagunitas went from having the same rep for like 15 years, who at one point we had damn near a dozen Lagunitas SKUs. Now it's just like, no, you get IPA. It's never really that fresh because they don't market it at all, and I don't even carry it anymore because, like, who cares? Because they don't bring in any of the cool stuff. Like this IPA is a perfectly fine old school West Coast IPA. I like that style of beer. That was the style of beer I cut my beer teeth on. For those of you wondering, your beer teeth are the ones, just slightly outside your canines. But it's probably a very medical term, I'm sure. But yeah, it's sad when some of these breweries get bought out. Same thing happened, of course, to Banded Peak, although I think Banded Peak hasn't really changed their beer quality very much. I won't say at all, but I also don't see as many seasonals from Banded Peak, and they seem to just get added on to, beer lists that are clearly owned by Labatt's. This is something I really haven't talked about much, but I was recently in Pincher Creek, as recently as this morning. But for lack of a whole lot of options in Pincher Creek, and because I was staying at the Ramada literally across the parking lot, I ended up going into the Boston Pizza, which is right next to the Ramada there, because I needed lunch. And for what it's worth, I actually quite enjoyed the roasted chicken wings. They were very good. But I was sitting there and I was looking at the bar, and it was clearly a Molson-owned property. They had Twisted Tea and Angry Orchard on tap, which A, I didn't know they made those in kegs, and B, who the hell wants a Twisted Tea on tap? But I digress. But it was so clearly a Molson-owned operation. Like, they had Belgian Moon, they had Canadian and Coors Light, each with their own, glowy, lit-up tap head. And I find that Banded Peak lately has been kind of the thrown-on designated craft beer for anyone who kind of owns Labatt's taps. And let's talk about that a little bit. When we talk about tied house legislation, we talk about, why we shouldn't allow a brewery basically to own a bar. It's because the brewery will pay for your draft setup, they'll pay for your fridge, they'll pay for your lines, they'll pay for your line cleaning every 2 weeks, as long as you only and forever and ever, cross your heart and hope to die, only sell their beer. And again, Labatt's and Molson's have bought pretty heavily into the craft side. I mean, Molson has Creamer Springs, they have Granville Island, they're looking to buy more. Labatt's has Goose Island, they have Stella, which not really a craft beer, but I digress. And of course now they have Banded Peak. But if they're giving money to the bar just to take over the draft lines, what if you're a local brewery? What if you're, just a brewery in general trying to get out there and sell your beer? And it's like, yeah, we're very interested. We love the product, but we literally can't. I hate that, and I'm starting to see it. It was really bad in the 90s. We had a kind of a sweet spot of 2008 to 2018, say, like a really good decade, where that tied tap thing started to break down, because the way that a lot of these contracts are worded is if you're selling, let's say, a wheat beer. Well, if you are selling a wheat beer and we have a wheat beer, you have to use one of ours. Even if it's just the one, even if it sucks. You can't put something else on in that category. Why we now saw the explosion of Goose Island IPA, which is not very good, at least up here, is because most bars, they were getting around their tied house contracts with Labatt's or Molson's by saying, well, you don't make an IPA. Well, we make Keys. We're both lying here. Shut up. We're putting on a real IPA because our customers demand it. The reason the Goose Island IPA exploded was that Anheuser-Busch, who owns Labatt's, actually does own Goose Island, and that's why it exploded up here. So we started to see that. I think as the big breweries start buying up more and more craft breweries, it's largely just to fill in every category. Now, I'll circle back around to our current topic in stouts. One way that a bar that had, say, a Labatt sponsored draft rail could get around that is by saying, well, you don't make a stout, so we can put a stout on. Well, I absolutely guarantee you that if enough of them did that, they would start actually insisting that, we have a Banded Peak stout 12 months of the year, so that they couldn't get out of the contract. It's a very ugly, ugly way of doing business. Wild Rose, yes, for Sleeman's, absolutely. Sleeman's also owns Unibrew. How many other aborted tastings are in the dustbin? Many which I won't remember, but, it's one of those things like I'm at home or I'm walking through the store and I kind of come across a cute musing that I'm just thinking about. It's like, we have a really odd number of Petit Chablis for some reason. I had a lady in earlier today who was looking for Petit Chablis. Didn't want Chablis. She wanted Petit Chablis, which is really odd. It's like someone going into a shoe store and asking for hush puppies in the year 2022. It's not a thing that happens. But yeah, she specifically wanted a petite Chablis, and I was thinking, it'd be really interesting to do sub-regions, like rather than doing Chablis, we do petite Chablis. And then that idea immediately fell apart because there really aren't any more examples like that. There isn't Little Bordeaux, there isn't Little Burgundy. And so that fell apart. But yeah, I am always thinking about ideas like that, and that's one that today occurred and then immediately fell apart because I couldn't think of, other than that wine, any way to build a tasting around that idea. Sorry, I need to catch up on comments here a little tiny bit. Annex has overtaken Establishment for me. I think they're neck and neck. Probably me too, but not by a lot. But yeah, I mean, I think when I first started driving up to Calgary to get 88 Cabin, Establishment, and Annex was firmly number 4 in my pantheon of kind of the 4 big breweries in Calgary, and I probably would have had them behind SYC back when I could get cool stuff from SYC. Now I think they're actually my number 1. They are really, really knocking it out of the park. Just leave the camera on. I don't know if Annex is doing more volume than Establishment. Because they're both in Connect now. Establishment got into Connect earlier, so they got... Let's talk a little bit about this. So, for the first few years that I was dealing with Establishment, I had to physically drive to Establishment, but I couldn't order any of their beers from Connect. How I do business with Annex, and basically always have, is I get their 4 core beers, which right now are the Good Authority, Force Majeure, Forward Progress, and the Idle Hands, direct through Connect, the universal website that every single liquor store orders through, because it's basically just a distribution company working on behalf of the Alberta government that supplies every liquor store, every restaurant in the province. If you have a liquor license and you order direct from the government, you get it through Connect. Period. There is no alternative. Now, for a long time, I had to get everything from Establishment, everything from Cabin, everything from 88 direct, because they were just getting started out. They didn't have anything in Connect, but Annex did. Annex, despite opening about the same time, they had stuff in Connect pretty much from the start. You could order everything province-wide. Didn't matter if you were in the weird northern part of Alberta or way down here. You just got it from Connect. And I think that they got more distribution early than some of the other breweries because they had that early first step. But I would also say that Annex, when they launched, they kind of launched quietly. I never saw the incredible hype machine about Annex that I saw about Cabin, that I saw about 88, that I saw about Establishment. For a very brief period, I saw about Outlaw. Outlaw was a huge deal. People were talking about it like nobody's business, right at the point where they just stopped. And I have no idea why. Annex never had that hype behind them. They launched fairly quiet, but they launched with really good distribution, and they were in a lot of stores because they could be accessed very easily. I get 2 Connect deliveries a week, whereas I have to drive up for the other stuff. These days, with all the other breweries being in Connect, at least for their core beers, and not the full range, I think Establishment only has 4 beers there, 88 has 3, Cabin has 3 or 4. I think all 4 of the core beers now, including Luminosity, are now in Connect. But that's a huge, huge, huge advantage, because if you're in Edmonton, if you're in a small town, if you're just trying to run a liquor store that's, maybe a very small one that just services the local neighborhood, you can't be driving to Calgary every week, or you're not trying to chase down the local seasonals, but you really do need to have things like Night Gallery and Super Saturation and Jamrock on your shelves. Having that Connect listing is a huge advantage. And I think that Annex enjoyed that for a while, but not anymore. I don't know in terms of gross liters if they're any bigger or smaller than Establishment or Cabin or 88, especially with the exponential growth that all of those breweries have been doing. All of them are basically perpetually under construction, adding on. Like Cabin's got their beer pipeline in the sky that goes up and over Confluence. 88 has been basically constantly expanding. They're also adding another bay, and again, they're going to have to go up and over the Carpet Store with their own pipeline to be able to do that. Establishment, they have added on, happily the bay next to them was actually empty, so they've been able to add on more easily. They've added a patio, they've added more seating, but they've also added a lot more brewing capacity, whereas Annex hasn't. I think they maybe started a little bigger, and or maybe they had a little more room to grow. In fact, I noticed that the bays next to Annex are still empty, so yeah, maybe they're just not in as hot a I mean, all these breweries are only like less than a kilometer apart. I guess 88's a little further away, but like I can't imagine that any of them really have an advantage in terms of real estate beyond just luck. Okay, so I wouldn't have cabin ahead of establishment. I think I'm gonna come down on Eric's side. I think that cabin is releasing two different beers of beer, but they aren't all that different from each other. Don't get me wrong. One of my 3 favorite beers of all time is Summer Saturation. I would drink that till I die every day and be completely thrilled with the situation. I think it's fantastic. Ditto Dial-Up IPA by 88. And I don't think that either Annex or Establishment have ever made a beer that I was that in love with to that point. But also I generally look forward more to their new seasonals than I do to Cabin or 88s. I'd say that I'd probably have Annex 1, Establishment 2, and then Cabin and 88 like sharing third. Let's talk roasted barley, which makes a stout from a porter. It's just malted barley. Other than the color, so the more that you caramelize sugar, so we're talking about, does it add alcohol versus flavor and color? They all actually do add flavor and color. But when you're talking about barley, what you're doing is you're caramelizing the sugars, and caramel does not ferment. Yeast cannot ferment complex sugars in any form. Even if it's just simple sugar in a caramelized form, it can't do it. It's not what it's set up to do. Yeast is a very simple organism. So when you're talking about these heavily roasted barleys, even anything past like amber malt, which is not very common unless you're making like a Vienna or something, anything past that, the sugars are almost 100% caramelized, so they're not adding alcohol. You're adding them in and getting no alcohol gain out of them. They're not adding anything to your actual calculation of what your final gravity, your final alcohol is going to be. You're just adding them purely for flavor. And as you slide down into like the crystal malts and your caramelized malts and your chocolates and your biscuits and all your other stuff that's kind of amber colored, you are giving away some attenuation, some alcohol level in order to get that flavor out of it. But there's very much a tipping point where you are not adding basically any alcohol to the final product. You're just adding flavor. And that's part of why, and also because you don't need that much, part of why they're not added in very high concentrations to the beer. And also because they become very bitter very quickly. I do not know what Aaron is doing, but he's doing something.
Okay.
You mean the camera that's been fine for the past 56 minutes, and now 56 minutes into tasting has to move?
Big problem.
Okay, big problem. Big problems. Stouts and porters, literally, stout started as the term stout porter or strong porter. It's literally just a difference there. Distinct malt bill. Yes, exactly. There's not supposed to be roasted barley in a porter. That's not to say no breweries would ever add it, because beer terms at this point are kind of flexible. And if you put in 1% roasted barley to make an ashier porter, no one would ever really call you on it, because you could just lie. No, I didn't put in roasted barley. That just must be the coffee notes from the chocolate malt I added. It would be very easy to lie about it. So I don't think that porter doesn't have roasted barley line is as relevant today as it would have been, certainly as it would be to like Camera or the BJCP. I think a lot of breweries are playing a little faster and looser with the rules. And yeah, it's very complex and spectacular malt. You're right. Huh, brown head is porter, white head is stout. That's fun. You know what? You're right, and I've never ever noticed that before. All right. for all of Aaron's camera finagling, I think we're going to call it there. This was a lot of fun. Thank you so much for tuning in. I will, of course, be off next week. You'll be hanging out with Craig and Eric, and it's going to be a lot of it's going to be too much fun. I'm stoked for it. So for me, I will see some of you Friday night for our Valentine's wine tasting. And for everyone else who is just on the beer tastings, I will see you in a couple of weeks. Enjoy the rest of your Wednesday. Have a wonderful night. Good night.